All right, everybody, what is going on? We are back here in the frozen lands of the north. As you can see, we got this beautiful headpiece here. Calgary Barbell, you know it. We're going to be making these available sometime in the new year as we get situated in HQ, which this might be the last Form Check Friday filmed here in Dylan's spare bedroom office. So lots of exciting things happening with HQ. Hopefully we can share more of that with you very soon. Also want to give a quick shout out to our sponsor for this video, Bells of Steel. Go check them out. We got some links in the description box below. They've helped us out with equipment for the new space, and yeah, they seem like they're pretty cool dudes. And we built a bunch of their stuff. It all seems solid, seems sound. We'll put it through its paces soon and give you all a little bit more info about that equipment in the next little while. But y'all are here for the one and only Form Check Friday, so let's get to it, shall we? Now, we're gonna start today off with where we left off last week. And where we left off last week was Noah. So Noah's been lifting for 5 months now. He's looking to work on the big three. So far he's been doing a PPL split, which means push-pull legs. And he's been trying to lock in his deadlift setup, but he says he's tall. His conventional max is 275 right now. So this is a set of 5, 80% at around 8 to 9 RPE. And he says he runs into his sticking point about 2 inches off the ground and is also wondering if he locks his knees too early. So the first thing I'm going to say here is that especially for longer lifters, I think a lot of the times longer lifters and wider lifters, so bigger, thicker people, a lot of times maybe get some benefit out of going a little wider. So one of the things I'd do here is potentially widen up the grip, widen up the stance, and that might allow you to get into a bit of a better position before we start the lift, as opposed to having such a high hip position. So that would be the number one thing that I would look at. Number two, it looks like we're actually doing a decent job of pulling the slack out, but it looks like we're also over the bar, and I think we could pull our hips down quite a bit more. So back angle looks okay, but we're really starting with like a quite a high hip angle, quite forward shoulder position. I wish I could see this straight on from the side, but alas, we don't have that technology to just rotate the video yet. Maybe we'll be doing 3D form checks soon, but not quite yet. So try to sit that butt down a little bit. Try to pull those shoulder blades back. I can see right before you start this lift that you do kind of like pivot back onto your heels a little more, which is good. I just want you to do that even a little bit more than you are currently, right? So everything back a little bit, sit your butt down, tighten up those lats and try to get that back into a good position. I don't think you're locking your knees too early. As a matter of fact, I think we maybe are shy of locking the knees kind of throughout. So if you do want to compete, we might need to be locking those knees a little bit more. Really common thing when people are first starting to deadlift, they think about locking out back because that helps a lot of the times getting the hips through at the top and kind of finishing with the hips and getting that good sort of leg drive to the end feeling. But we also have to think about continuing to use the quads, continuing to push down. So I often tell people think about locking out up as opposed to locking out back. When we lock out back like this, the hips go further forward and we tend to unlock at the knees, which can be a red light in competition. So hopefully there's a lot to think about there, Noah, and hopefully you got some good tips and tricks, some good advice in the comment section of our last one. Generally, people seem to be incredibly helpful with that stuff. So shout outs to our community for being pretty darn awesome. All right, so this is Caesar. This was submitted by, I think, his dad. I'm going to guess that's him. So Caesar's 15 years old. He's got interest in competing as a sub-junior. He's about 80 kilos body weight, and this was his 1 rep max test of 120 kilos. So first off, nice work, Caesar. That's way more than I was squatting when I was that age because I squatted 0. But yeah, let's get into some technique stuff and take a look through this lift. So man, for just starting lifting, things look really, really good. There's a few things I think we can work on. Number one, trying to get the elbows a little more in line with the trunk, a little more in line with the body. And the reason I always talk about that is because when your arm is oriented like this, your shoulder blade tends to be higher up, right? We tend to be in an elevated or shrugged up position to get the elbows up high. And a lot of the times when we are shrugged up like that and the shoulder blades are up, we hit the bottom and then we're going to get pitched forward, right? It's really hard to keep the upper back nice and tight from this position. So that's why I say pull the elbows down. That's going to help, ideally, the shoulder blades come down your back and towards each other a little bit. If you want to think about it in terms of your elbow position, one of my favorite cues that I got from another Calgary barbell coach, Taylor, was to think about in the middle of your belt, in the middle of your back, there's a spot like this, right? Imagine there's a spot there. And think about pulling your elbows in towards that spot. So it's not just pushing your elbows forward, it's actually pulling your elbows in towards kind of a midline in your body. And that tends to really put the shoulders and upper back into a good position. The next thing I'm going to point out is it does look like it's a little bit high, so we're going to have to work on getting a slight bit more depth should we want to compete in powerlifting. It looks like we're kind of right on the cusp there. And one of the things I think is happening is we're kind of running out of forward knee movement, right? So the knees are going forward kind of as far as they can, and without the heels coming up, we're probably not going to get much more depth. So that's where I would recommend a heeled lifting shoe. It looks like these are, I don't know, maybe skateboarding shoe or basketball shoe or something like that. But they look flat. So I would recommend trying out a lifting shoe, a heeled lifting shoe. Looks like that's what your dad's got going on here. And I think that's one of the things that's going to allow you to get a little bit more depth while making very minimal changes to your technique. I don't think there's many things you're going to have to change in order to get good depth there. It looks like this is almost there. It's very close. And then on the way up, yeah, we get a little kind of off-centered on the feet, right? So we come up and then we kind of fight back and forth a little bit throughout the lift. So I think keeping the pressure nice and even through your feet, imagining like leg pressing the floor away as you come up, and just a little bit more practice, I think, are probably going to be the biggest things in terms of ironing out the concentric or the upwards phase of the movement. Like, it's also heavy, right? If that was a 1 rep max test, it's heavy, which is normal. That's to be expected. So, yeah, those are my critiques, and I think it's awesome that a person as young as yourself is lifting. So, yeah, good on you, and keep it up. Up next, we got Kieran. So Kieran says he's been lifting 79 days, which is very specific. But I've been doing 3x5 on the bench. This is 55 kilos. Interesting. Okay, all right. I can get behind that. So you can see this is a good spot or good handoff. So I wouldn't recommend getting used to this, but this is useful if you're just starting, having somebody actually pull your shoulder blades together and push them down so you can help the person kind of feel what it's like to put them into position. So, you know, as long as you don't end up relying on that and you can learn and understand how to put your shoulders in that position yourself, then I think that's a great cue and a great sort of thing to help somebody do. So good work, spotter. Very nice unrack. Looks like you take the time kind of pulling the bar out into position. Nice touch. Good. We could use a little bit more elbow flare on the way up. So here, sorry, didn't pause at the correct moment. So here, looks really good. Maybe slightly over tucked in the elbows, slightly. But I would say on the way up, allow those elbows to come out. Just make sure that those shoulders stay in that tucked position all the way through. And if you can do that, you're gonna continue to have that really nice bar path. Your setup actually looks super solid. Like, this is a good technical bench. It's just gonna take a little bit of time to practice, to learn the coordination and the skill. There you go. So that rep, your elbows kind of flared out a little bit better on the way up. The other thing I would do is get into the habit of pausing these if you have any interest in competing in the future, and even as an accessory movement. So if somebody comes to me and they're like, I'm just general fitness, I just want to get bigger or more jacked, or I enjoy doing this and it's a way of staying healthy, etc. If you're trying to get your bench up and you don't care about competition, I think it's still useful to do some paused bench, right? So if your main like comp bench or the bench that you're trying to improve is touch and go and you're fine with that just being touch and go, that's okay. But I do think in most cases there's utility in having some additional paused bench to help us work on that nice tight contraction on the chest, training that specific joint angle on the chest, etc. So can be worth it, even if you're not looking to compete anytime. Let's see here. Ty. So Ty's from Vietnam, 20 years old, 70 kilos body weight. Started getting into lifting to improve body composition and fell in love with powerlifting because it had nothing to do with body composition. So I think it's a really cool story of, getting into fitness because you're like, I hate my body. And these are things he mentioned in his email. I hate the way I look. And the thing with, I think, approaching your lifting like that is that you're always beholden to the opinions of others, right? So if your self-worth and your value is tied into that, now this can be, easily mimicked in powerlifting if you're tying your self-worth to your total, which don't do that, folks. But I think the switch that Ty's talking about in the context of his email was that he went from caring a lot about his body and a lot about how he looked and being very conscious of how other people looked at him to getting to this point of where he's more concerned with what his body can do, and gets excited when he can, put more weight on the bar and excited about being stronger. And those things I think we can have more control over, or maybe are a little bit easier for us to not put so much worth on. And in some cases, easier to draw less of those social comparisons, which I think can be good in some ways for sure, because competition drives people and extrinsic motivation is not a useless thing. But if it's easier for you to create that intrinsic motivation because you're powerlifting as opposed to doing something aesthetic based, then can be a really freeing thing. So anyways, good on you for that, Ty. So with your pulls here, I think we're not really pulling the slack out of the bar. Okay. So I think what we want to do is we want to take more time sitting the hips down and trying to find tension off the floor, trying to actively push the floor away as you bring your hips down into position. It looks like, so Ty mentioned in his email he'd like to compete in powerlifting if straps are allowed one day. And I think Ty's got something going on with his left hand there where he can't grip the bar. So what I would say is I think most federations you can like appeal, or there are rules and regulations for people who have limitations like that to kind of add some inclusivity in powerlifting. So I would say reach out to your local federation, see if there's a way that you can still compete and lift. And if that's something you want to do, then I would say we should try to make some room for that to be allowed and for that to be a thing. So, yeah. In terms of your deadlift, though, I think pulling the slack out is the biggest thing. By the time we get to those later reps, you pull the slack out way better on like rep 4 here or 5 than you do on rep 1. Because the earlier reps, I think you're really kind of jerking into it and trying to get this like explosive start. And I think one of the things I try to talk people out of with deadlifting is that it should be an explosive movement. I remember a long time ago seeing people like, I don't know why everybody's talking about being patient off the floor. Deadlift should be explosive. And I don't think that guy's lifting anymore. But regardless, I think there's, from an efficiency standpoint, there's a really strong case to be made for smoothly and evenly pulling the slack out of the bar. Again, I'm going to give a shout out to my boys at Melbourne Strength Culture, Charlie over there, and the boys did a great video on pushing the slack out as opposed to pulling the slack out. Kind of a different cue, different way of thinking about things. Check them out. They have a good YouTube channel. They put out good content, and Charlie's an athlete of mine. I've been working with them for a long time and stoked to see them making content. But yeah, either way we think about it, I want you to try to create tension against the bar and get the bar to the point where you see how it kind of almost deforms when you start pulling on it, right? See how the bar shape changes slightly? That's what we want to try to achieve before the actual effort of, okay, let's lift this off the floor. So that's kind of what I'm getting at here. But pulling the slack out of the bar, basically starting with higher hips. The way I like to coach it is to start with higher hips, find a nice tight upper back position, slowly pull the hips into position while also opposing that force by pushing the bar or the floor away. And essentially we're creating a lot of tension this way so that we're loading the hips and hamstrings and everything's getting nice and tight, and you should be able to feel contraction in quads, low back, upper back, glutes, hamstrings, like all the way throughout, arms nice and long, and then we're pushing the bar off the floor. So hopefully that's a decent enough breakdown of those things. Our next lifter here is Odette. She's been powerlifting training for 2 years and training otherwise for 6, and is competing in her second ever competition. I think it just passed, actually. She sent this in, I think, early November, and said she competed 3 weeks from then. So hopefully you did really well. Just from the quick first glance, it looks like you're doing a wonderful job of squatting here. You said you started using squat depth because you were having, squat shoes because you were having trouble with depth. And this looks phenomenal. This looks fantastic. I think your depth is perfect. Generally from this angle, things look higher than they are, but it still looks to me like you're achieving, perfect and full powerlifting depth, right? If we can get this to pause at the right moment. Boom, right there. Perfect depth, wonderful upright torso position, locked in upper back, feet flat. Like you're a gifted squatter, Odette. I don't know that I would offer you much in terms of like, okay, let's change things. The only thing I might mention here, because you mentioned bracing specifically in your email, is when you're initiating the lift, we do have a little bit of a habit of kind of going into this extension. And this isn't necessarily a bad thing. A lot of people squat better with this bit of extension. It helps them stay tighter. Not everybody is going to be oriented the same way in terms of their bracing, but one of the things I would recommend that you try, especially post-competition, is using more of a ribs down kind of bracing, where instead of this excessive curve happening, the whole trunk shifts and we maintain a little bit more of a neutral range. A lot of times that can make it easier to hit depth. So maybe you're stronger or feel better in flats, but you had to use the heeled shoes to get depth. If you change your bracing up a little bit, you might be able to go back to flats if that's any sort of advantage for you, and still be able to get good depth because of changing the way that we're kind of braced through the low back and hips as we approach the bottom position of the squat. Again, that being said, you're doing a wonderful job. Like I said, bracing, you're keeping the knees forward out of the bottom, you're getting good depth, you're maintaining a relatively upright torso angle, which again, isn't always the goal, but given your squat style, if we lose that torso position, things are gonna change a lot. The other thing I'd mess with is maybe playing around with your bar position. You might be able to get that a little bit lower down your back and utilize a little bit more of that torso lean like I was talking about. Might get a little bit more power out of that, a little bit more contribution from the posterior chain. Right now, this is looking like a pretty high bar, pretty quad dominant squat. Not a bad thing. But I think it is worth kind of exploring different avenues to see, okay, am I stronger? Am I more comfortable? Am I more controlled? Can I get more consistent depth? All those kinds of things. So yeah, just a few things to mess around with. I wouldn't say those are like, oh, you have to do these. Definitely, implement these into your training. But I would say try these couple things out, see if any of them contribute to your squat. And yeah, I hope that helps. You're a wonderful squatter. Keep it up. And next we have Tim doing some bench press. Before we get started with Tim, just want to give a quick reminder to everybody that we have the Calgary Barbell Training app. It is available. It has our program library on there. I think we have 23 right now. Just started the Path of Powerlifting series, which we're going to re-up and add more to every 12 weeks. We've got our Discord community popping off. I'm doing form checks like this in that Discord twice a week, going through every single submission, telling everybody how to fix their technique, as well as helping people to modify the programming. So it's kind of like coaching light. It's a lot more than you would get from just downloading a PDF. We also have stuff about that in the description box below. So check out the Calgary Barbell Training app. It's one of the best ways to support us and get what I think is a really fantastic service at the same time. So I don't have to be on here talking about sponsored by underwear or protein cereal or some shit. So, all right, Tim, 18 years old, training powerlifting for 2 months. He says he lifted through high school, and this is a comp bench triple at 7. So he says bench is the one he feels like he can improve on the most technically. And specifically, one of the things he's thinking about a lot is trying to figure out his foot positioning and leg drive. So he says he goes between like a further out foot position and a further back foot position, and is trying to figure out, okay, which one of these is going to give me the more consistent leg drive, which one of these is going to contribute more to the arch or more to the press. So we're going to leave this here for y'all, our community members, to go down into the comments section below, leave your 2 cents about Tim's bench. Let us have some constructive criticism from a man here. And then when we start Form Check Friday next week, I'm going to start off with giving my 2 cents on Tim. If you're looking to submit to form checks, again, there is info in that description box. We did a whole video on how to submit. And yeah, that's it for me. Shout outs to everyone for sending your stuff in. We love y'all. And hopefully we got more coming on HQ real soon. Bye-bye.